It was midnight in the heart of a well-groomed cookie-cutter subdivision in the suburbs of Orange County. All the lights in all the houses were off. The only source of illumination lay in dirty orange pools at the feet of streetlights. Silence gripped this neighborhood around its throat. No cricket chirped, no dog barked, and no cat did hiss. All those familiar sounds of night found in the suburbs were missing. It was like the very night itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to break the silence that had engulfed this bastion of banality. That silence was finally shattered, along with a large pane of glass that sat in the confines of a tasteful French front door on a house at the end of the street. "Tom, what was that?" Marie whispered. Her husband, Tom, spotted awake with a cough. He rubbed the sleep from his eyes, taking a moment to gather his wits before addressing his wife.
"What?"
he asked.
"I heard something. It sounded like glass breaking," she said.
Uh-oh. Okay. Call the police. I'll go have a look.
He got out of bed, slipping on a pair of well-used house slippers. Padding over to the closet, he pulled out an old baseball bat that hadn't seen the inside of a field since his college days. Marie scrambled for her phone in the dark as Tom padded silently out of the room on the tips of his toes and into the hallway. The picture-filled length of hallway that led to the front of the house seemed miles long that night as he crept down its length. He paused at the half-open door of his son's room, shifting the bat into one hand as he pushed open the door to check in on Jacob. The door swung in on well-oiled hinges, and his blood turned to ice as his eyes fell on his son's empty bed. Where was his son? The world tilted under his feet, and he grabbed hold of the door jamb to steady himself. His breathing became ragged as he was filled with the kind of terror only a parent can know. He sprinted towards the front door, desperate to find his son. He rounded the corner of the hallway and slid to a stop on the tiled floor in the generous front room. The fear drained from him, quickly replaced with confusion as he tried to process the scene in front of him. Standing before Tom with his back towards him was his son, Jacob, his small 10-year-old fist covered in blood and shards of glass, thrust through where a thick pane of decorative glass had once been. Jacob's entire body was shaking furiously under his superhero pajamas, like a scared dog. Tom shivered in the cold breeze that blew in from the ruined door. As he inched closer to his boy, he could see Jacob's pajamas clinging to his body, soaked through with sweat, like he was suffering from a tropical fever. "Jacob, oh my God, are you okay?" he asked, rushing over to his son's side, placing a hand on his quivering shoulder. He quickly removed it in pain. The boy's shoulder felt hot as a used clothes iron. "Jacob, are you all right? Can you hear me?" Jacob turned his head to look his father in the eyes. Tom fell backwards away from Jacob, pushing himself away with his feet while trying to make the sign of the cross at the same time. The boy stared at his father with glowing eyes the color of flames before speaking in a voice not his own. "Release me!" Jacob boomed. The voice was not his, could not be his. The boy spoke like mountains dying, loud, crushing, inexorable. Tom was pinned against the wall by the power of the voice, tears of blood leaking from his eyes. His brain reeled desperately, trying to make sense of what was going on. Jacob lowered his glass-filled arm, the blood dripping from the wounds, hissing and smoking as it hit the floor tiles, and walked over to his cowering father. "Release me from your bonds!" he bellowed. The force of his words cracked the tile behind Tom in a wave. Tom's nose began to bleed from the devastating force of his son's words. As the blood leaked down his face, it caught Jacob's eye, and a visible change overtook him. The shaking that had dominated his body shivered to a stop, and the fire fled from his eyes, retreating to tiny pinpricks of light in the dark pools of his pupils. "Don't hurt my daddy!" Jacob screamed. His voice was his again, but the effort to regain control of his body was too much for the small boy, and he collapsed at his father's feet. Tom leaned against the shattered wall and shook with terror as he stared at his unconscious son. Tom knew what this was. He had seen it happen before when he was but a boy, to a neighbor, but he never thought it could happen to them. "What is going on?" Marie shouted as she came into the ruined foyer. She broke into tears as she spotted both her husband and son laying on the floor covered in glass and blood. She ran over to her Jacob and scooped him up in her arms, his tiny body no longer burning with hellish heat. "Tom, what is happening?" she asked. Tom pulled himself up the wall to stand before his family.
"Did you call the police?" he whispered.
"Yes, but what?" she said.
"The cops won't be enough." He walked back to the bedroom to place another call.
It was close to 4 a.m. when the phone started wailing like a cat in heat, waking the sleeping man from a nightmare about the end of the world caused by artificial sweeteners and microwave ovens. Swatting at the phone only served to turn its screen on, flooding the tiny motel room with caustic blue light. Squinting against the laser beam-like quality of the phone, he answered it by sliding a thick sausage finger across the screen. Half awake, he smashed the phone against his head, somewhat near where his ear should be.
"Yeah, Marcus Hightower, what you want?" he mumbled.
"Wake up, sleepyhead, I got a job for you." Sarah, the booking agent from the network, managing to sound chipper at 4 a.m.
"Hold on,"
Marcus said. He dropped the phone on the bed as he shuffled through the grimy little motel room to the equally grimy sink to splash some cold water in his face, trying to rouse his sluggish brain cells. With cold water dripping from his stubble-covered head and feeling somewhat more a part of the land of the living, he shuffled back over to Sarah, who was humming happily on the other end of the phone.
"Okay, what do you got for me?" he asked.
"Just got a call in a case involving a young boy. Let's see, details are as follows. Jacob White, 10 years old. Police were called on a probable B&E, came in to find a distraught family, Tom and Marie, who told them their son was possessed and gave this description: flame-red eyes, booming voice, no reaction to physical harm, and unnatural body temperatures. Has all the makings of your standard demonic possession. Should be a routine shake and bake. Plus, it's like 20 miles from you, so I figured you'd want it." "So, do you?" she said, rattling off everything at a rapid pace.
"What?"
Marcus asked. "Do you want this call? Because if not, your dear old pal Jake is like an hour out and would love to snatch it up from you."
"Yeah, hell, I'll take it. And tell Jake to stay the hell off the West Coast. This is my turf," Marcus said.
"Oh, sweetie, you know we don't do turfs anymore. But I did get a probable in Rhode Island that I'll send his way if you get down to the job ASAP. These sound like nice people in a shitty situation. And Marcus, it's a kid," she said.
Okay. Send me the address and the details, and I'll head out after I grab some coffee,"
Marcus said as he moved about the tiny room, tossing clothing into a large black duffel bag. "Thank you, sweetheart. I'll let them know you're on your way. Be safe." A minute later, while Marcus was sitting on the bed, yawning in the dark, the phone buzzed to life, lighting the room back up. This time it was an email with the address and case file notes. Marcus threw on his best, or rather his cleanest pair of jean shorts, followed by a graphic tee sporting a gun-toting Jesus with a speech bubble saying, "Come with me if you want to live forever." He pulled a battered leather-bound journal from underneath the thin motel pillow. The old dog-eared book was his codex of spiritual intruders, and the means to dispatch them. He shoved it into the small of his back, letting his belt hold it in place as he reached for a thin silver-beaded chain and hung a shiny gold badge around his neck. The badge was a gold kite shield with a flaming sword laid across the front of it with the words Vade Retro Me inscribed around it. The badge once shined bright, but over time it had grown tarnished and forgotten, like the people who carried them. Marcus eyed himself in the mirror, lifting his large shoulders in a shrug, before he stepped out the door and into his beat-up old van. He drove down the deserted highway in silence, straight into suburban hell. 20 minutes later, Marcus was driving down quiet little side streets filled with identical homes. He had to keep checking the address on his phone against the numbers posted on the mailboxes, on the street curbs, and on the cookie-cutter homes before finally pulling up to the White residence. His van squeaked to a stop in the driveway next to a brand-new middle-of-the-road luxury sedan. Marcus stepped out of his van and stretched his back as he looked about the too-quiet neighborhood. He could never see the appeal in living in a place that looked so boring. It was all too damn normal out here for his tastes. He walked over to the front door and reached out a hand to knock, stopping himself when he noticed that the front door was mostly gone, so he reached over and rang the doorbell instead. He waited a few minutes, and when it was apparent that no one was going to come to the door, he reached in through the ruined frame and opened it from the inside, letting himself in. His sandal-clad feet crunching on the glass that covered the ground, he brushed a path through with the sides of his cheap flip-flops as he looked around the front of the house. The kitchen and living room areas were deserted, their tastefully decorated confines bare of any human or demonic presence. Pausing in the middle of the living room, he tried to listen for the occupants. Down a darkened hallway, Marcus could hear the muffled sounds of a woman crying, and soft, consoling words from a man. Marcus gave one last look at the front of the house and made his way over to the hallway. As he reached the mouth of the hallway, he was hit with a wave of malevolence that made his teeth tingle, forcing him back a step. Marcus shook his head in surprise. Whatever was back there, it was strong, and it was mad as hell. Sniffing in defiance, Marcus rubbed a thumb across his nose like a tough guy from an old movie and made his way down the darkened hall, cheap flip-flops slapping against his feet in the tiles like the world's crappiest drummer boy. He came to a half-open door that led to a child's room. A small bedside lamp dimly lit the room, sending a slash of light out into the hall. Through the gap of the door, Marcus could see a middle-aged couple sitting on a pair of undersized chairs, holding onto each other for dear life. Marcus pinched the bridge of his nose, fighting back a headache caused by the unrelenting waves of hate coming from the demon in the room with them. The couple in the room must have been normal as they come to ignore the emphatic assault being thrown off by the entity in the room, otherwise it would have driven them mad by now. Even though they weren't able to feel the effects of the thing's hate, they looked to be having one hell of a night. Every muscle in their bodies looked ready to spring into fight or flight as they perched on the edges of their little chairs. Marcus knocked as gently as he could on the door to get their attention without scaring them, but the couple still jolted in their seats like they'd just been stuck with a live wire, and spun about to face him as he pushed open the door. The befuddled looks on their faces told Marcus that they were not expecting him to look the way he did. People call for an exorcist and expect a clergyman to appear, clad in the holy pontificalibus of the church, with cross in one hand, a Bible in the other. Instead, this family got a 5'10" former Marine with a powerlifter's physique and the style of a beach bum. Being an exorcist was no longer a church-dominated business run by those with true faith. Turns out anyone with a sensitivity to the uncanny aspects of the world could perform an exorcism, as long as you knew the proper rituals and words for all the different critters that like to wear people like unwilling meat suits. Marcus held up the gold badge that hung about his neck, the light reflecting off its surface sliding over their faces, and relief flowed into them as they realized this was the man, the exorcist, they had been waiting for. The father stood up and extended his trembling right hand in greeting, his voice never breaking above a whisper.
"Tom White," he said, "and this is my wife, Marie."
Pleasure to meet you," Marcus said. He shook hands with the father and stepped into the room completely to shake Marie's hand. It was then that he noticed the boy on the bed. The boy couldn't have been more than 10 years old and looked very small as he lay chained to his bed on top of a superhero blanket. Police-issue handcuffs held his arms to the headboard, while his feet were secured with those heavy-duty zip ties that the cops use when they run out of cuffs. A length of steel chain was wrapped around his bed and body, holding him tight. His breathing came fast and shallow, like a dog panting in the heat, and sweat covered his body as if he had been in a sauna. The boy's eyes were the color of flame as they bore into Marcus with unabashed hatred and rage. Marcus tore his eyes away from the afflicted boy and faced the terrified parents.
"So, how long has this been going on?" Marcus asked.
"It happened last night, or this morning, I guess, around midnight," Tom said. Marie stood up beside him, clasping her hands around his.
"Nothing before that? No strange dreams, weird noises, unexplained small animal mutilations?"
Marcus asked as he ran down the list of common demonic precursors.
"No, nothing like that. Everything was fine. We went to bed, and the next thing I know, I wake up to find my boy punching through a glass door and yelling at me like a monster. How could this happen? We are good, devout Christians. We go to church every Sunday and do our best to live free of sin." It's not uncommon to have cases of spontaneous possession. It's rare, but it happens. Usually there's a period of terror-bringing in which the intended host will be tormented until their will has been weakened enough for the unclean spirit to enter. But the stronger the critter, the less time it needs, Marcus said. Unless it's been invited in, of course.
That's insane. Who would want something like this? Marie asked.
Crazy people, mostly. And cultists, but mostly crazy people, Marcus replied. Reaching behind him, Marcus pulled his leather-bound codex out of his waistband, a habit he picked up from a sergeant of his in the Marine Corps. He flipped through the worn pages of the codex to the chapters that held the words to the demonic exorcism. He was moving over to stand near the boy's head when the father placed a shaking hand on his shoulder.
Will this hurt my boy?
Your boy? No. The thing inside of him. Yes, very much so. Unfortunately, it will use your boy to yell and scream. You may be tempted to go to him, to comfort him. I wouldn't recommend that, Marcus said. He removed Tom's hand from his shoulder and gave him a reassuring pat on his own.
Why?
Marie asked. Why what? Marcus was getting a little peeved with all the interruptions.
Why wouldn't you recommend that?
She asked, looking from her boy, then back to Marcus. Last time I was called in for an exorcism, an old woman who had been co-opted by a Dubak, evil Jewish spirit thing, very nasty. Her husband became so distraught at the cries of the thing, he went to hug her or some shit. The Dubak got a hold of him, broke his collarbone before I could pull him away from her.
Oh, my lord, she said, casting a tearful gaze at her husband.
Oh, okay, we'll stay over here then, he said as he and his wife pulled back near the door. That would be for the best. Now, no matter what may happen, stay where you are. Don't touch me, don't touch the boy. And above all else, no prayer. It screws with my work, Marcus said. The looks in their eyes told him they weren't convinced that he was the man for the job. Don't worry. I do this kind of thing all the time. I'll be done before you know it. Marcus laid his hand upon the boy's burning hot head while he held his codex at eye level, more from force of habit than for a need to see the words. He had done so many demonic exorcisms, the words were indelibly etched into his mind. Damn things were forever trying to break into the mortal plane for one reason or another. He took a few breaths to calm and center his mind before the words of the exorcism rolled off his tongue in Latin. Exte mihi egredietur daemonium de hoc vase, Marcus said. The boy began to squirm under his hand, his eyes glowing bright like embers in a stoked forge. A growl grew from the boy's mouth, so low and deep it set the pictures hanging on his walls to rattle on their hooks. A wind began to blow about the room that stunk of burnt bodies and crushed bone. Immundum presentia ad inferos, he shouted at the creature in the boy. The boy lifted his head from the pillow and shouted back in a language Marcus could almost, but not quite, make out. But the anger behind the words was quite apparent. The force of it was astounding, rattling his teeth in their sockets until he could taste blood in the back of his throat. Marcus slammed the boy's head back down onto the bed, drawing a gasp from his parents that he ignored, as he continued with the ritual. Ad umbras fuge hinc, Marcus shouted, his words almost lost against the howling wind that now carried the sound of ethereal voices screaming in pain. The demon inside of the boy was letting out a stream of booming curses in that language Marcus could almost recognize, punctuated by a horrendous, booming laugh. A terrible grin spread across the child's face, stretching the muscles beyond their normal capacity, revealing every tooth in the boy's head. Distantly, Marcus could hear the boy's parents crying and shouting from the doorway to the boy's room. Evocem meum in perpetuum, Marcus said. He closed his hand on the boy's head to grab hold of the spirit, which should have been rendered corporal enough by the exorcism for him to grab hold of. Marcus ripped his hand away, making a wild throwing motion to the ground, casting the evil spirit back to hell, freeing the boy from this affliction and ending this nightmare for everyone. At least, that's what should have happened. But instead of silence and an end to the demonic light show, all everybody got was a deep, rumbling chuckle coming from the still possessed boy. What the fuck? Marcus said. Tom and Marie were still in the doorway, looking from their son and to Marcus with a terrified, confused look on their faces. What's wrong? What is it? I don't think it's gone, Tom shouted.
Why is it still here? Why haven't you got rid of it? Marie asked. Marcus didn't answer them because he had no answer to give them. It should have worked, but it obviously didn't. Marcus made his way back to the head of the bed, through the wind that was blowing about the room, stronger than ever. As he reached the bed, Marcus held tight to the headboard and confronted the beast that held little Jacob.
Demon, I command thee, speak your name. In the name of Jesus Christ, you must obey,
Marcus shouted, trying to bluff the demon into giving up its name. He had no right to command in Jesus' name, not being a clergyman or even a believer, but sometimes demons couldn't tell the difference between a sensitive and a priest. The boy turned those flame-red eyes back onto Marcus and smiled before answering.
Lean close, and I shall whisper my name to you, Exorcist,
it whispered. The terrible, destructive boom had left its voice, making Marcus think that he had cowed this beast into submission. Thinking his bluff was paying off, he leaned close to the chained boy, placing his right ear close to the boy's dry, flaking lips. Hovering over the boy's head for what felt like an eternity, Marcus heard him whisper something too low to make out. So he inched closer.
You are a fool, the boy hissed. He lunged at Marcus, faster than humanly possible, and sunk his teeth into the side of his head. Small, sharp teeth tore through the flesh and cartilage of his right ear, nearly severing it in one bite. Reacting to the shock and pain, Marcus pulled away fast and finished the job the boy's teeth did not. Marcus fell away from the bed, clutching his hand against the ruined patch of flesh that had once held an ear. He watched in disgust and horror as Jacob slowly ate his ear. The boy sucked the ragged flesh up like a piece of spaghetti, blood splattering on the walls and over his dry lips. As if that small meal of human flesh had rejuvenated him, Jacob pulled at the handcuffs that held him to the bed. The chain that held the cuffs together on his right hand failed against his unnatural strength, and with one arm free, he reached over to free his other hand from the second pair of handcuffs. Marcus sat on the floor in shock, clutching at his head as he saw Tom run from the doorway, trying to reach his son. No! Stay away from him!
Marcus yelled. Tom ignored him as he pushed his way through the maelstrom that surrounded his bed-bound son. Tom stumbled up to his son's bed and clutched desperately to the ruined headboard as he reached for his son's hand. The thing that was Jacob stopped trying to pull its left arm free as Tom extended his hand out to it, with tears in his eyes, trying to reach his tormented son. The thing inside Jacob grabbed tight to Tom's hand. Even through the howling wind and rattling pictures, Marcus could hear the sound of breaking bones. Tom's screams were finally washed out by the thing's laughter. The sound of her husband's bones being crushed by her son was too much for Marie, as she left the safety of the doorway and ran to her family. She ran right past Marcus, who sat on the ground, his hand pressed to the side of his head, trying to stem the flow of blood from his missing ear. Marcus tried to grab her as she ran past, but she shrugged off his hand. Nothing was going to stop her from reaching Tom and Jacob. She pushed through the howling winds to reach her husband and son, placing her hands on both of them, trying with all her might to separate them, with tears flowing from her eyes. "Jacob, you let go of your father and stop this right now!" she yelled, and to everyone's amazement, he did. The wind that had been called up disappeared, taking with it the sounds of tortured souls. The pictures on the wall stopped flapping about, and they were left in silence. Tom pulled his crushed hand out from Jacob's grasp and stumbled away from his son, half carried by Marie, out of the room. Jacob lay back down on the bed, eyes closed, his breathing coming fast and shallow. Marcus took this as his cue to drag himself up from the ground and scramble out of the boy's room, slamming the door shut behind him before pulling the badge from the chain around his neck and jamming it into the wood of the door. "Retrovade me, retrovade me, retrovade me," Marcus whispered. He smeared a handful of his own blood across the badge on the door, causing the badge to slightly glow, sealing the creature into the room for the time being. Marcus stumbled towards the two fleeing parents, heading for the living room, his right hand pressed back up against the bleeding stump of his missing ear. Marcus found Tom sitting on the edge of an old recliner, clutching his ruined hand to his chest in pain, while Marie was in the kitchen calling for an ambulance. Tom stared accusingly over at Marcus through his reddened, tear-filled eyes.
You said you do this all the time. You said everything would be fine. Everything isn't fine. What you did didn't work, he screamed.
Marcus had no words for the man and looked towards the floor in shame. Tom was right. Marcus had come into this exorcism half-cocked, so sure of himself, and everything had gone to hell. His anger was overwhelmed by the pain in his hand as Tom sunk back into the easy chair, whispering the Lord's Prayer. His accusing words were echoing in Marcus's head, along with the strange language the boy had spoken. Marcus just knew he had heard or read that language before. It was right on the tip of his tongue. Tom finished the Lord's Prayer and started in on a prayer Marcus had never heard before, one calling upon the angels of the Lord to guide and protect his family.
Tom, what denomination are you and your family? Marcus asked.
Tom stopped his prayer and stared up at the ceiling, his head spinning from the pain.
What does it matter to you? He spat. Please, it could be important to me figuring out what the fuck is going on here, Marcus said. We are part of the Church of the Heavenly Host.
Marcus could hear the defensiveness in Tom's voice, and it was no wonder either. The Church of the Heavenly Host had been in the news a lot lately, with their highly publicized butting of heads with the papal authorities on the worship of angels, as well as rumors of church orgies. The Catholic Church viewed angel worship on the same level as idolatry, or placing another before God. Marcus sat there thinking about the thing in Jacob, the semi-familiar language it spoke, the fact the family were devout angel worshippers, and it all slid into place.
Motherfucker,
Marcus said, startling Tom from his pain-induced stupor.
Excuse me?
He mumbled.
Not you, Tom. I think I know what's in your boy. Do you have any hand towels handy? He said.
Tom just waved weakly from the couch towards the kitchen. Marcus got up and went into the kitchen to find a towel to staunch the bleeding from his head. As he stepped into the kitchen, Marie was just hanging up the phone.
What do we do now? She asked.
First, I need a towel and some duct tape. Then I get you your boy back, he answered. It took Marcus until the paramedics arrived to find some duct tape to hold a bundled-up rag to his head and a makeshift bandage. He wasn't about to let the paramedics tape him up and then charge him up the wazoo for it. They took Tom away, putting him into the back of the ambulance. Marie stopped at the entrance to the ambulance and looked at Marcus.
Should I stay?
She asked.
Go with your husband. I'll be right behind you.
With your boy, Marcus said. With tears in her eyes, she climbed into the back of the ambulance and took a seat next to her unconscious husband. One of the paramedics closed the back doors and was about to get into the front to drive away when he spotted Marcus sporting his makeshift bandage.
What happened to you?
He asked. Little kid ate my ear, Marcus said.
You might want to get that checked,
the paramedic replied.
I will. Thanks, Marcus said.
The paramedic just shrugged and got into the ambulance. The lights bathed the neighborhood in blood and sun in alternating strobes. Marcus watched the ambulance disappear into the pre-dawn light. A few neighbors that had been awakened by the sirens now stood outside, staring over at the maimed exorcist as he slowly walked back into the house to do battle with the supernatural entity that was still inside young Jacob. The blood smeared across the wood of the door was black and charred as the entity within the room worked its will against it. Marcus pulled the badge from the door and placed it back around his neck before he kicked the door in with one sandal-clad foot. Jacob was sitting upright in bed, both his hands free and spread wide in greeting. The wind had returned, swirling about the room, now carrying the pictures that had once been on the walls, creating a spinning field of debris for Marcus to wade through. He kept his head low, with an arm thrown up to protect the wound from flying debris as he made his way to the head of the bed. Jacob's fire-filled eyes watched his every step.
You come to try your strength against me again, conjurer,
he boomed. That's the plan, Stan. Do me a favor and tone it down before you knock a filling loose, Marcus said. He pulled out his battered codex once again. The thing in Jacob chuckled softly as he saw him thumbing through its pages. Mark flipped through the book, filled with rituals to pull out everything from demons, wights, succubae, dybbuk's, ghosts, skinwalkers, tokoloshes, and more. He passed them all, getting almost to the end of the book, to the section that dealt with the rarest of possessions, stopping on a page he had never actually had the misfortune to utilize. Looking it over, he sighed in defeat, realizing that all the signs were right there if he had just taken the time to do his due diligence. The boy wasn't being used as a meat puppet by a demon. He was playing host to one of the heavenly host. This was an angelic possession. The signs were all there. Devout family, young boy, honoring the word of his father and mother, and if Marcus had been a clergyman, the thing inside would have introduced itself. But Marcus wasn't. When he came in trying to cast him out like a demon, all he did was offend the angel that was inside the boy, treating it like one of its fallen brethren. Now that Marcus knew what was in the boy, though, all he needed was a name to pull the angel out and bring the White's boy back home. Turning the codex around, he showed the page to Jacob and to the angel inside. Jacob's face went from arrogant smirk to rage as he saw the ritual that was inked on its pages. Jacob's arms shot out for the book, but Marcus took a quick step back.
You think you can cast me out? I was prayed for. I will not leave until I have carried out my divine task, he boomed.
Malak Elohim, tell me your name so that I may praise it unto the Lord, Marcus said in a sickeningly pious tone as he ignored the ranting angel. He could see the angel inside Jacob trying to resist the force of the words as he fought back against the urge to name himself.
B'nai Elohim, let me know your name to spread its glory. Malachim, speak your name thusly so that your message can be told. Seraphim, bless me with your name so I might hear its glory, Marcus shouted. I am Nathaniel, who rules over hidden things, fire and vengeance, and I will see this sinful world be burned clean of the stain of humanity, he roared.
Jacob fell back on the pillow, the angel's strength spent for the moment.
Well, it's nice to meet you, Nathaniel,
but it's time for you to go home, Marcus said. He smiled smugly, turning to the next page. The ritual for expelling an angel was all about harnessing the power of mankind and was to be improvised, using things symbolic of major human achievements. So, using a bit of his own blood, Marcus marked a crude stick figure of a person on Jacob's forehead, claiming Jacob for mankind.
In the name of all things belonging unto man, and by all the accomplishments we have made with no help from on high, I cast you out, angel. In the name of the internet, the internal combustion engine, and the space program, Marcus said.
Jacob renewed his struggle against the chains holding him, trying to escape the barrage of words Marcus rained down upon him, each one causing Jacob to flinch and buck in pain.
You are not wanted. You are not needed. And we reject your judgment of us because we believe only in the judgment of our peers. And our peers are human. Get out of this boy, Nathaniel, and return to the heavenly host to sit in the downward gaze of your father, Marcus said.
The swirling wind stopped abruptly. Pictures and toys clattering to the ground, filling the room with a deafening staccato that ended as fast as it started. Jacob lay on the bed, his flaming eyes slowly fading back into their normal pale blue. The strength of the angel slowly leaking out of his body. His shoulders slumped as the effort of keeping the boy's body upright became too much for the angel to maintain. Nathaniel lay Jacob back upon the bed, leaving him staring up at the ceiling, with eyes like dying embers.
I only wanted to make him proud by punishing the wicked, Nathaniel whispered.
He doesn't do that anymore, remember, Marcus said. He reached over and laid his hand gently upon Jacob's brow.
He doesn't do much of anything anymore. All he does is watch you pitiful things and wait,
Nathaniel said, his voice growing ever weaker. Wait for what? Marcus asked.
For the end,
Nathaniel said. The flame in Jacob's eyes winked out, leaving them the light blue the child was born with. Marcus could feel the angel's presence caught in the palm of his hand, burning with a subdued rage, and all thought of witty words fled from his mind. He turned his hand around and stared at the bare soul of an angel. Long moments passed as he was almost lost in the glory of the angelic intruder. With a gasp, he tore his gaze away from the blazing pinprick of light, closing it in his fist. Turning towards the small window, he threw the tiny star towards the sky, casting the angel back into the kingdom of heaven and away from poor Jacob. Far out into the distance, the rumbling sound of thunder rolled through the sky. Maybe that was God giving Nathaniel a stern talking to. Jacob lay asleep on the bed, looking none the worse for wear after being used as an angelic finger puppet. Marcus shuffled through the wreckage of the room until he managed to find a set of keys to the locks that secured the chains around the boy's unconscious body. He unlocked the locks, unraveled the chains, and gently pulled them off of him. Marcus pulled out a small pocket knife he kept in the right pocket of his shorts and made short work of the zip ties on the boy's legs. He scooped the boy up from the ruined bed and slowly made his way out of the room, headed for his van. Marcus had to get Jacob back to his family. He had made a promise, and he intended to keep it. Plus, he really needed to get that head wound looked at.